Recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Director Wray, since January of 2021, approximately 1.8 million illegal alien gotaways have evaded Border Patrol and entered our country. And this doesn't even account for the unknown gotaways, which former Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz testified before this committee could be about 20% of that number, meaning the real number of gotaways is well over 2 million. Can the FBI guarantee the American people that known or suspected terrorists, including any from Hamas or other terror groups, are not amongst those gotaways?
Well, certainly the group of people that you're talking about are a source of great concern for us. That's why we're aggressively using all 56 of our joint terrorism task forces.
But there's really no way for you to guarantee that Hamas isn't in those.
Well, again, as you say, there's the unknown unknown and the known unknown.
Right.
But what I can tell you is that our 56 joint terrorism task forces are working their tails off to make sure that they suss out and identify potential terrorist suspects, whether they're on the watch list or not.
You think that number, that increased number, increases the threat to the American citizens?
I think anytime you have a group of people in the United States that we don't know nearly enough about, that is a source of concern for us from a perspective in our lane of protecting Americans here.
So wording it maybe another way, if it were lower, if that number were lower and the border wasn't as open as it is, and we'd be safer.
I think greater fidelity about who's coming in this country and how they're getting in is essential to making sure we protect Americans from all sorts of threats, including a potential terrorist attack.
Yeah, I do too. Director Wray, since taking office, we've had, with the policies that are implemented at the border, 6.5 million southwest border encounters and a total of 7.8 million nationwide. Does it concern the FBI that the policies of this administration and the Department of Homeland Security are allowing this unprecedented number of unknown and unvetted people into the country? I know it's a rewording of the previous question, but go ahead and answer.
Well, again, I want to stay in my lane. When it comes to physical security, border security, I want to defer to Department of Homeland Security on that.
But that increased number is increasing the challenge before you and the FBI, right?
But certainly I can tell you that we have seen an increase in the number of so-called KSTs attempting to cross in the last 5 years. And we are concerned not just about the people who are watch listed,
well, why do you
about those who could have gotten in some other way and about whom you may not have sufficient information at the time they came in to identify them as a source of concern.
Those individuals that watch list that we talk about, why do you think in 4 years before this there were only 11 and suddenly there are 294 in the past few years? Why do you think that's so?
I can't really speak to that issue. It's not in my lane. I can tell you that the threats that come from the other side of the border are very much consuming all 56 of our field offices, not just in the border states. That's why I made the point.
Sure, I agree. If I heard you correctly, what you just said is not every state in the country is a border state now. Is that what you just said?
Well, I mean, the threats to every state. That way, but the threats that come from the other side of the border are affecting every state.
Absolutely, 100%. We ask the governor of Massachusetts. She's screaming at the top of her lungs about the situation at the southwest border. Your boss, the Attorney General, came in and said to us that it was very clear the cartel strategy was to take advantage of the current policies, overwhelm the crossing sites, and then use the Border Patrol agents being overwhelmed by that group to then bypass. Do you have any reason to disagree with him that that's the cartel strategy?
I wouldn't have any reason to disagree with the Attorney General.
Do you find it interesting that 2 months after that, Secretary Mayorkas came in and said he was unaware of that cartel strategy? Do you find that interesting?
I'm not familiar with Secretary Mayorkas'
that testimony. Yeah, he came in to us and told us that he was totally unaware of that testimony, that was the cartel strategy, despite your boss in the Senate clearly recognizing that it is. Let me just say this in the few seconds I have left. I'd like to ask each of you to take back to the people who work for you that despite our political differences on this dais, we deeply appreciate the men and women who are manning their posts and doing the best they can for this country. As someone who went down range and was in a helicopter that had bullet holes ripping through the bottom, bullets ripping through the bottom of it, I understand the courage that it takes to do the jobs that you and your people do. And so I want to make sure I ask each of you, despite our political differences, to take this message back. We are deeply appreciative of the men and women who man their posts for this country's safety. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very much. Let me paraphrase what the chairman just said. While we praise our men and women, when the opportunity comes to put the money where the praises are, Democrats on this committee have consistently supported the funding of DHS's budget. We've consistently funded the FBI's budget and our intelligence gathering agencies, because we understand that those men and women who put their lives on the line deserve all the resources. Now, taken from that, we've not, on the Democratic side, ever voted against one of your budgets. We understand it. We can differ on the policy, but we don't differ on the fact that you need the investment. There are some members of this committee who've even advocated defunding the FBI. Now, I can't in my wildest dreams imagine if we had an impotent FBI where that would put us. Director Wray, if those advocates who wanted to defund the FBI in this country, can you give us a snapshot of what that defunding would mean for the security of the homeland?
Well, I mean, the FBI in the last year, for example, has arrested over 18,000 violent criminals. That's about 50 per day. So defunding the FBI would mean that many more violent criminals out on the streets terrorizing neighborhoods. We have, as I said in my opening statement, about 2,000 active investigations into Chinese economic espionage. Restricting our funding would be a gift to the Chinese Communist Party. The FBI has about 380 investigations into cartel leadership. Lifting our funding means more power to the cartels. The FBI has investigations into 100 different ransomware variants. And each one of those has scores of victims. Limiting our funding means more hacks, more intrusions, more damage to critical infrastructure. China alone has the biggest hacking program in the world by far. They're not slowing down. They're not restricting their funding. So from our perspective, it's not just about the hardworking career professionals of the FBI and their families and their kids that would be affected. More importantly, it's state and local law enforcement who are counting on us more and more. And more importantly than that, the American people that we're trying to protect from gangs, the Chinese government, cyber hackers, cartels, child predators, et cetera.
Ms. Abbazzi, can you say what resource deficit would mean for your agency?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the National Counterterrorism Center has a couple of important missions. We're the primary center for the United States government to analyze and assess the foreign terrorist threat. We work on screening and vetting of individuals that are trying to enter the country. We support DHS and FBI in that mission with the intelligence database of known and suspected terrorists. We do a lot of work across state, local, tribal, territorial, and federal authorities to do the kind of information sharing that's absolutely essential, especially in a dynamic threat environment like we have today, to keep everyone informed and armed with the information they need to protect against exactly the kinds of threats that we've outlined here for you today. So decreased funding for the National Counterterrorism Center, decreased funding for any piece of the overall CT architecture that works collaboratively together has an impact on our ability to stay ready against the terrorist threat.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas, there's a supplemental proposal being put forth by the administration. Can you share with us what that means for DHS?
Ranking Member Thompson, that supplemental is dedicated to our critical mission of securing our border and also battling the scourge of fentanyl. Those funds are needed for personnel, technology, facilities, and additional support resources critically needed to advance our mission. We are under-resourced and have been perennially.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me say my thanks to all three of you, your employees who worked so hard to protect this country. Having served at the Department of Justice for many years and the Chief of Counterterrorism and National Security, I think you don't hear that very often these days. And also, I agree with you, Director, that 702 FISA is a critical element to securing and protecting Americans. And I will fight very hard to get that reauthorized. Moving forward, Director Wray, we've had over about 7.5 million encounters at the southern border. We've had 7,000 special interest aliens. We've had 200, nearly 200 on the terror watch list. When I chaired this committee, that was the first, when I got the briefings, first question I ever asked was, how many SIAs, how many on the terror watch list? If I would, 200 is alarming to me. Does that give you concern?
Certainly, the numbers give us concern. I think it's important, though, in some ways, to realize that numbers alone don't even really tell the problem. We've all seen how much damage just a small number of foreign terrorists could cause. I mean, sometimes people, as crazy as it sounds, tend to forget that it was 19 people who killed 3,000 people.
That was the next point I was going to make. It only took 19 to create 9/11. And that's alarming. I just got back from Israel. I saw the Hamas videos. It is very disturbing. I know you've testified previously that Hamas could either inspire attacks or maybe get into the country. The problem is we don't know who these 200 people are. And to your point, how many others got in that we don't even know about. Why won't either you or the Secretary provide us with the full, complete, accurate information, as I used to get when I was chair of this committee? Who are these 200 individuals? Who are they? Is Hamas on the list? We know the SIAs include countries like Iran, Lebanon, and Iraq. That gives me great pause. Will you provide that to this committee?
Well, we will certainly continue to engage with the committee in closed session with numbers and information. As you know from your past experience with this issue, for one thing, the numbers themselves change literally moment to moment. And so it's important for us to be careful, to be accurate and timely with the information we've got. But then I think
and it could be in a classified setting. That's how they used to do it when I was chair of this committee. I don't have that information. My governor of the state of Texas, who has to deal with this problem on a daily basis, cannot get this information. You know, I understand before 9/11 we had walls up, you know, sharing information, connecting the dots, but this is, 2023. I mean, it seems to me we should be able to share that information.
Well, I'm happy to have my staff follow up. I know we've had a lot of engagements with the Hill over different numbers and populations of individuals, and so I guess I'd have to circle back to figure out exactly what happened.
I would like, as an American and a Texan, I'd kind of like to know personally. And Mr. Secretary, there was an Austin SWAT officer killed in my hometown who was on the terror watch list. A SWAT officer murdered by someone on the terror watch list. and the family involved was Mohammed Nasser. Do you have any information about this?
Mr. Chairman, we'd be pleased to provide you with whatever information we have in the.
Please do. And let me just say, 18 U.S.C. Section 2A states, whoever commits an offense against the United States or aids and abets, counsels, command, induces, or procures its commission is punishable as the principal. Human trafficking, a criminal enterprise in this country now with people with no legal status, an entire population 7 times over to be killed by fentanyls, 12 billion total, 300,000 people dead due to fentanyls. Sir, I would argue that you've been aiding and abetting the deaths and the criminal enterprise that has occurred in this nation. I see my time. Well, I got 15 seconds.
No, you don't.
Oh, I'm 15 seconds over. I'd still like to go on, but I think I've made my point.
It's going the other way. The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for his 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, just for informational purposes, there are Americans on the terror watch list as well. So, I would suggest we take in all the information with respect to that. I want to thank the witnesses for making themselves available today. Director Wray, in 2021, more than 26,000 Americans lost their lives by homicide, close to 21,000 of which were committed with a firearm. The same year, 61 of 73 law enforcement officers who died from felonious assault were killed by firearms. While we're seeing more states, specifically reliably Republican voting states, adopt more permissive gun laws, we're also seeing a rise in anti-government violent extremists targeting law enforcement. How dangerous is it to be in law enforcement right now under these circumstances? And how do we rectify the threat to the men and women of law enforcement?
Well, certainly, this is a dangerous time for law enforcement. As you mentioned, 2021 was the deadliest year for law enforcement, I think, since 9/11. And this year, the pace is awfully close to what 2021 is. And I say that with a level of personal familiarity with it. In 2021, we had 2 of our agents killed in Florida attempting to execute a search related to a child exploitation case, and a task force officer of ours in Indiana gunned down right outside of our offices. And every time, one of the things I decided I was going to do when I took this job now 6.5 years ago was every time an officer is shot and killed in the line of duty anywhere in the country, I call the chief or the sheriff myself and talk to him and express my condolences on behalf of the FBI. I have a little write-up on the family, a photo of the fallen officer, and I've made something like 350 of those calls. And, being in law enforcement is dangerous enough. What it shouldn't be is wearing a badge making you a target, and we're seeing way too much of that in today's America.
Okay. Let's see. Can you explain why 60% of guns used in violent crimes in New Jersey, the state I represent and have lived in all my life, come from Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida? What do those states have in common that make them dangerous exporters of criminal firearms?
I'm not sure I could speak to the specific circumstances of each of those states. Certainly, straw purchases and gun trafficking is an ingredient that drives the violent crime problem that we have in this country. It's one of many things that drives that problem.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the final minute of my time to Mr. Golden.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I asked to yield just to respond to something that my distinguished colleague from Texas just said, who I know has served for a long time as a federal prosecutor, as have I, and as has Secretary Mayorkas. I think it's incredibly dangerous to accuse Secretary Mayorkas of aiding and abetting crimes. As you well know, you need to have the intent to do that. And it is clear that whether you disagree or not with Secretary Mayorkas's approach to dealing with the border, that to accuse him of aiding and abetting crime is very serious and is, I think, unwarranted in this situation.
Well, gentleman yield?
Yes.
Look, I live in a border state, you don't. And I've dealt with this issue for 25 years. I've never seen it this bad. It's his dereliction of duty that has created this problem in the United States. 7 million people. How are we going to deal with that? No legal status, human trafficking, fentanyls. Look, we will disagree on this one, but I have to say that the change of policy has created this problem, and he knows better. He was a U.S. attorney in Los Angeles, like you were. He knows better.
Will you yield for 1 second?
I yield back.
Actually, the time has expired, so if someone